There was once a man who believed daughters were a curse. When his wife gave birth to their third girl, he threw the blanket aside in disgust. 3 failures, he spat, pacing the room like a caged animal. His wife wept quietly, clutching the newborn to her chest. The neighbors whispered, but no one dared speak against him. He was the head of the house, and his word was law. That night, he made a vow that chilled everyone who heard it. Only a son can carry my name. Only a son will inherit what I build. His wife looked down at her daughters and felt her heart break. She knew then that their father had already abandoned them in his mind. Within weeks, another woman appeared at their doorstep. Young, confident, and visibly pregnant. The man smiled for the first time in months. The second woman gave birth to a boy, and the house erupted in celebration. Drums echoed through the streets. Neighbors brought gifts. The man paraded the infant like a trophy, declaring him the answer to all his prayers. He named the boy heir to everything he owned, though he owned little. The first wife watched from the shadows, her daughters clinging to her wrapper. No one had celebrated when they were born. No one had drummed or danced. The boy was wrapped in the finest cloth, while her girls wore faded hand-me-downs. The second woman strutted through the compound like royalty, her head high, her tongue sharp. She made sure everyone knew she had given the man what the first wife could not. From that day forward, the house was divided, not by walls, but by worth. The boy ate meat while the girls ate bones. He drank milk while they sipped water. His plate was always full. Theirs were often half empty. The father watched this happen and said nothing. In fact, he encouraged it. A son needs strength, he would say, pushing more food toward the boy. The girls learned early to hide their hunger. They learned to smile through the ache in their bellies. The first wife began skipping meals entirely, sneaking her portions to her daughters when no one was looking. She grew thinner each week, her cheeks hollowing, her arms weakening. But her daughters never went to bed starving. The second woman noticed and laughed. Look at her, she mocked. Wasting away for nothing. The man only shrugged. Favoritism had become the air they breathed. One afternoon, the second wife humiliated the first in front of the entire neighborhood. She gave him 3 useless girls, she announced loudly at the market. But I gave him a king. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The first wife stood frozen, shame burning her face. Her daughters were with her, close enough to hear every word. The eldest clenched her small fists, tears stinging her eyes. When they returned home, the father was waiting. The first wife expected him to defend her, to say something, anything. Instead, he looked away. His silence hurt more than any insult. That night, the eldest daughter lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Something inside her shifted. The man she had called father felt like a stranger now. She stopped reaching for his hand. She stopped seeking his approval. He had chosen his side. The first wife began disappearing at night. She told no one where she went, slipping out after the household fell asleep. She worked cleaning floors, washing clothes, doing anything that paid. Her hands blistered and bled, but she saved every coin. The money was hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her room, her secret, her hope. She dreamed of sending her daughters to school, of giving them a future their father refused to provide. But secrets in small houses never last long. The husband grew suspicious. "Where do you go?" he demanded one evening, blocking her path. She lied, saying she visited a sick relative. He didn't believe her. His eyes narrowed with distrust. He began watching her movements, following her shadow. He caught her counting money one night, coins stacked carefully on the floor. "What is this?" he roared, snatching the pile. She tried to explain, her voice trembling. "It's for the girls' school fees." His face twisted in fury. "School fees? For them?" He laughed bitterly, throwing the coins across the room. "You waste your time on girls who will marry and forget you. Only sons repay their parents." The daughters stood in the doorway, watching. The youngest started to cry. The eldest stepped forward. "Father, we only need— Get out of my sight," he shouted, cutting her off. They scattered like frightened birds. The first wife knelt, gathering the scattered coins with shaking hands. She didn't cry. She just made a quiet vow to herself. "One day, we will leave this place." The boy was enrolled in the best school in town. His uniform was crisp, his shoes polished, his bag filled with new books. The father beamed with pride, telling everyone who would listen about his investment. "This boy will make me proud," he declared. Meanwhile, the girls attended a crumbling government school with leaking roofs and no desks. Their books were borrowed, their uniforms patched. The father never asked about their grades. He never attended their school events. To him, they were invisible. The boy, however, noticed everything. He saw how his father treated his half-sisters, and he learned to do the same. He mocked them at home, calling them worthless. He took what he wanted and shared nothing. The world revolved around him, and he believed it always would. The first wife watched it all and grew weaker. The insults became unbearable. The second wife tormented the first daily, calling her barren of value, a failure of a woman. The father never intervened. Sometimes he even smiled. The first wife felt herself sinking, drowning in an ocean of scorn. Her body grew frail from overwork and stress. Her spirit cracked under the weight of rejection. But in that brokenness, something hardened. She began making plans. Quiet, careful plans. She reached out to a distant relative in another city who offered her a place to stay and work. It wasn't much, but it was escape. It was dignity. One night, while the house slept, she packed a single bag for each daughter. She left behind everything else: the photos, the memories, the years of suffering. At dawn, she would walk out of that gate and never look back. She left without a word. The sun was barely rising when she took her daughter's hands and walked through the gate. The second wife woke hours later and noticed the silence. She walked through the empty rooms and laughed. "Finally," she said, clapping her hands. "The burden is gone. Now we can live in peace." The father, still half asleep, barely registered what had happened. "They'll come back," he muttered dismissively. "Where else can they go?" The house felt lighter to him, quieter. He convinced himself he was better off. The boy played in the courtyard, unbothered by the absence of his half-sisters. The second wife cooked a feast that night, celebrating what she called their new beginning. But outside those walls, the first wife and her daughters were already building something the father couldn't imagine: a life without him. Days passed before the father truly noticed. The house was too quiet. There was no one to shout at, no one to blame. He asked the second wife where they went. She shrugged. Does it matter? He didn't search for them. He didn't ask around. Deep down, he believed his wife would return begging, that she couldn't survive without him. But she didn't return. Weeks turned into months. Meanwhile, the first wife had found work in the city. It was hard, grueling labor, but it was honest. Her daughters attended a small school nearby. They were poor, yes, but they were free. They no longer flinched at raised voices. They no longer hid during meals. For the first time in years, they smiled without fear. The father remained ignorant of their new life, convinced they were suffering somewhere, regretting their departure. Life was not easy for them. The mother worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. She cleaned houses during the day and sold food at night. Her daughters helped where they could, carrying water, running errands. There were nights when they had only bread and tea for dinner. But they were together. That mattered more than anything. Then one evening, the youngest daughter collapsed. Fever ravaged her small body. Panic seized the mother's heart. She carried her child to the clinic, begging the nurses for help. The doctor said it was malaria, severe, but treatable. However, treatment cost money they didn't have. The mother's savings were nearly gone. She stood outside the clinic, her mind racing. How could she save her daughter? What could she sacrifice now? The answer came swift and painful. She sold everything. The few pieces of jewelry she had hidden, her spare clothes, even the cooking pots. Neighbors watched in pity as she liquidated her life piece by piece. But she didn't care. Her daughter's life was worth more than pride. The treatment worked. Slowly, color returned to the child's cheeks. Her fever broke. She opened her eyes and smiled weakly at her mother. The first wife wept, not from sadness, but relief. Her daughter lived. That was victory. But the cost was steep. Now they had nothing left for school fees. The term was starting soon, and the school demanded payment upfront. The mother sat awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she would manage. Her daughters were brilliant students. She couldn't let them stop now. She had to find a way. Meanwhile, back in the father's house, the boy had grown arrogant. He swaggered through school like he owned it, bullying younger students and defying teachers. His father had spoiled him rotten, and it showed. He believed rules didn't apply to him. When a teacher scolded him for cheating, he laughed in her face. "My father will handle you," he sneered. The teacher wrote a letter home, warning of his behavior. But when the father read it, he crumpled it up. "Boys will be boys," he said dismissively. The second wife agreed. "He's just confident," she cooed, stroking her son's head. The boy smirked. He had learned that consequences were for other people. His arrogance grew unchecked, a weed in fertile soil. Teachers began dreading his presence. Classmates avoided him. But no one could touch him. His father's blind love was his shield. The warnings multiplied. Letters came home weekly, complaints about fights, theft, disrespect. The father ignored them all. "They're jealous of my son," he told himself. "They want to see him fail." When the school finally suspended the boy for pushing a classmate down the stairs, the father stormed into the principal's office, shouting threats. "You'll regret this," he yelled. The principal remained calm. "Your son needs discipline, not defense." But the father didn't listen. He pulled the boy out of that school and enrolled him in another. The pattern repeated. New school, same behavior. More warnings, same denial. The boy learned a dangerous lesson. Actions had no consequences. He grew bolder, crueler. The second wife praised him regardless. "You're special," she whispered. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The boy believed her. And it would cost him everything. Far away, the daughters thrived despite their hardships. They studied by candlelight when electricity was cut. They shared one textbook between three, passing it around like treasure. Their mother's sacrifices fueled their determination. They refused to waste the opportunities she bled to give them. The eldest daughter excelled in mathematics. Her teacher noticed and entered her into a regional competition. Against all odds, she won. The prize was small, a certificate and a cash award, but it felt like gold. When she brought it home, her mother wept openly. "You see," she whispered, holding her daughters close. "You are not useless. You never were." News of the win reached a local charity. They offered the eldest a partial scholarship to continue her studies. Hope, long buried, began to bloom again. The daughters looked at each other and made a silent promise. They would rise. Back at the father's house, money began vanishing. Small amounts at first, coins from the table, bills from pockets. The father blamed the housemaid and fired her. But the theft continued. The second wife noticed her jewelry was missing. She accused neighbors, causing fights in the compound. But the real thief was closer than they thought. The boy had developed expensive tastes. His friends flaunted designer clothes and gadgets, and he wanted the same. When his father refused to give him more money, he simply took it. He felt entitled to everything in that house. One evening, the father caught him red-handed, emptying a drawer. "What are you doing?" The boy froze, then lied smoothly. "I was looking for a pen." The father wanted to believe him. So he did. He ignored the evidence before his eyes and convinced himself his son was innocent. But the boy's sins were no longer small. He was caught on camera stealing from a classmate's bag. The footage was undeniable. The school expelled him immediately. This time, the father couldn't charm his way out. He brought the boy home in shame. The second wife sobbed dramatically, blaming everyone but her son. "They set him up," she wailed. But the truth was obvious. The boy was a thief. Worse, he showed no remorse. He shrugged when confronted, his eyes cold and empty. Soon after, he started spending time with a dangerous crowd, older boys who drove flashy cars and wore thick gold chains. The father warned him to stay away. "Those boys are criminals," he said. The boy laughed. "They're successful. Unlike you." The insult stung, but the father said nothing. He was losing control of the son he had worshipped. The daughters had made their peace with abandonment. They no longer wondered if their father would call. They no longer hoped for apologies. He was a ghost to them, a painful memory they buried deep. The eldest, now in secondary school, began working part-time to help her mother. The second daughter tutored younger children. The youngest sold fruits after school. Together, they built something their father never gave them: stability. They made a vow one quiet evening. "We will succeed without him. We will prove we were never the curse he called us." Their mother listened, tears streaming down her face. She had raised warriors. Meanwhile, the boy dropped out of school entirely. He claimed education was a waste of time. "I'll make money my own way," he declared. The father, now older and weaker, could only watch in silent despair. The boy fell into fraud. It started with small scams, fake online shops, phishing schemes. But he was greedy, and greed made him reckless. He joined a syndicate that stole identities and drained bank accounts. The money came fast and easy. He bought clothes, phones, drinks for his friends. He felt powerful, untouchable. His parents asked where the money came from. "Business," he said vaguely. They didn't push. They never did. But the law was watching. Investigators had been tracking the syndicate for months. They gathered evidence, identified members, planned the raid. The boy bragged to friends about his schemes, never suspecting the walls were closing in. One night, his phone buzzed with a warning from an accomplice. "They're coming. Run." But it was already too late. The sirens were already wailing outside. The police stormed the hideout just after midnight. Doors crashed open. Shouts filled the air. The boy tried to flee through a back window but was tackled to the ground. His hands were cuffed. His rights were read. Panic clawed at his chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to be untouchable. They dragged him into a van alongside his accomplices. At the station, reality hit him like cold water. There was no escaping this. No father to bribe his way out. No mother to weep him free. The evidence was overwhelming. Messages, transactions, testimonies. He had been sloppy, arrogant. Now he would pay. His parents were called. They arrived at dawn, faces pale with shock. The father looked at his son through the bars and saw a stranger. "How did this happen?" he whispered. The boy didn't answer. The trial was swift. The judge showed no mercy. "You are a menace to society," she declared. 7 years imprisonment. The gavel struck. The boy's legs buckled. 7 years. He was led away in chains, his expensive clothes now prison rags. The second wife screamed and fainted. The father stood frozen, his world collapsing around him. The son he had sacrificed everything for, the son he had chosen over his daughters, was gone. Humiliation followed. Neighbors whispered. Relatives distanced themselves. The father, once proud, became a shell of himself. His health deteriorated rapidly. Stress and regret ate him from the inside. The second wife, unable to cope, grew bitter and resentful. She blamed him for spoiling the boy. He blamed her for enabling him. Their house became a tomb of accusations and silence. The father lay awake at night, replaying his choices. And slowly, painfully, he began to remember the daughters he had thrown away. Old age showed no mercy. The father's body failed him, his legs weakened, his sight dimmed, his hands trembled. He could no longer work. The second wife, bitter and drained, refused to care for him. "I gave you a son," she spat. "Where is he now?" The father was alone. He had no friends left. No respect. No legacy. Just regret. In his desperation, he thought of his daughters. He had heard rumors, whispers that they had done well, that they had become successful. He didn't know details, but hope flickered in his chest. Maybe they would help him. Maybe they would forgive. He found their contact information through an old relative. His hands shook as he dialed the number. It rang. And rang. No answer. He tried again the next day. And the next. Silence. They knew it was him. And they chose not to respond. He called repeatedly. 10 times. 20. Then 50. Each call went unanswered. Each message left unread. The silence crushed him more than any words could. He began asking around, trying to learn about their lives. What he discovered broke him. His daughters had graduated with honors. The eldest was a nurse. The second, a teacher. The youngest, an accountant. They lived together in a modest home, supporting their mother who no longer had to work herself to exhaustion. They had built the life he said they never could. They had succeeded without his name, his approval, his money. They had become everything he told them they would never be. And they had done it in spite of him. The realization gutted him. He wept alone in his empty house, understanding at last what he had lost. He gathered his remaining strength and traveled to their home. He stood outside, staring at the clean walls, the blooming garden, the laughter spilling through the windows. It was everything his house was not. He knocked. The door opened. The eldest daughter stood there, now a woman, her face unreadable. "Please," he croaked. "I was wrong. I am sorry. I am old and sick. I need help." She stared at him for a long moment. He saw no anger in her eyes. No hatred. Just nothing. She stepped back and quietly closed the door. He knocked again. No answer. He called out, his voice breaking. "Please. I'm your father." From inside, he heard the youngest daughter's voice, calm and cold. "We have no father." The words struck him like a blade. He sank to his knees, weeping. But the door remained closed. He returned home alone, broken in body and spirit. The house was dark and cold. The second wife had left him weeks ago, unable to bear the shame and poverty. His son was behind bars, silent and unreachable. The daughters he had rejected were thriving without him. He had nothing. No one. He lay on his mat, staring at the ceiling, replaying his life. Every cruel word. Every dismissive glance. Every choice that led him here. He had believed sons were blessings and daughters were burdens. Now, in his final days, he understood the bitter truth. He had thrown away his blessings and worshipped a burden. The daughters he called worthless had become his only hope. And they had given him exactly what he once gave them. Nothing. He closed his eyes, alone in the darkness, and waited for the end he had earned.